A lot of the examples from deliberative democracy and the crowdsourcing examples focus on relatively bounded local level initiatives. There's a beginning, middle and end and a process. Can it be used in bigger processes and ongoing, more intractable processes?
Look, often I tell those sort of the pizza story and people say, oh yeah, well that's all very well and good for pizza, but what does that mean for more sophisticated and regulated markets? Well, the application of this stuff, if you look at a platform like Lending Club out of the US, which is now a peer-to-peer lending club, has lent $4 billion in small business loans, peer-to-peer, essentially a TripAdvisor for small business loans, if you like, or an Airbnb for small business loans. Society One in Australia, if you want to freak out about if anyone's here involved in the regulation of the financial industry, Society One in Australia is going to be the same thing. In fact, they've just hired the Lending Club CEO out of the US, and it's got Packer and Murdoch money in it, Society One. And when I hear Mike Smith, the CEO of ANZ Bank a few weeks ago, slagging it off, viciously, it's a massive disruptor coming for the traditional banking sector in Australia. And it's skewing that triangle because it's a new platform away from the regulators and the incumbents. I think if we can do, if the market's becoming mature and sophisticated enough to deal with and insurance is the same, massive disruptors in Friendsurance, in Guavera, some platforms you might want to go and have a look at. If we can do this in highly regulated financial markets, we can do this to solve very sophisticated and difficult problems in government as well. We're not there yet, but I think we need to shift our thinking into that ubiquitous utility mode so that it becomes, a bit like I suspect it is culturally in Finland, becomes part of the order of things. It is the way government does business, as opposed to an extraordinary outlier because we went out and consulted online.
Right, so I would say that crowdsourcing is really flexible as a method. So we can use it almost for any purposes we want. So it depends on the goals. Let's say if you want to run like a longer term crowdsourcing process, I would first ask the question, if somebody came to me and asked for my advice, is that why do you want to run it for 1 year instead of 1 month? Like, what do you think you're going to gain of having the process on for such a long time? Because based on the experiences we have, the longer the time, the more participants you will get, but then the ideas start to repeat themselves. So, but on the other hand, there's value in getting as large crowd as possible because that adds to the inclusiveness of the process and also the legitimacy. The larger the numbers, the more people have participated. So it's like a trade-off. And I do think that whether it's a long-term process, a more complex process, or a more simple local process, we can design in a way that it can be successful.
Okay, no, sure. At the back there, please. Thank you. If you've got questions, indicate and I'll start lining up. Yeah, middle.
Hi, Darren Whitelaw from Department of Premier and Cabinet in Victoria. David, I'll start with you. Just when politicians and decision makers in the bureaucracy have a fear of asking people what they want in case it's something different to what they think they should be telling them. So, and you yourself as admitted as Premier, you shut down Facebook in the department. Sure, times have changed, but how do those people wanting to embrace crowdsourcing and involving citizens in policy design get over the fear or help others and decision makers get over the fear, uncertainty and doubt that goes along with this? And maybe then, Tanya, your experience as well.
So this is a really interesting one, and I work at local government level and state government level around Australia a lot, and that question is a lot of, we think we need a new channel to talk to our consumers and customers and citizens and what have you with, but our elected members are terrified of this stuff because someone will say something with the caps lock key on and blah. What my answer to that is that necessarily your Facebooks and Twitters are actually now as standard as your front counter, or your what have you. But they aren't the place that I'm saying is the end game. That is the ubiquitous nature of the engagement of the citizen, the consumer. But what we need to do is construct platforms on which, I explain it in local government like this. In local government, everybody around the room understands that we build a town square because we want people, or a park, because we want people to recreate, sometimes protest, to come together as a community. And we also know that there are rules and regulations in your participation in that town square. If you're drunk and disorderly, you're going to get hauled off in a paddy wagon, right? What we need to do is create platforms, public open spaces online that actually have built in with them, usually enforced rules by the crowd actually, a set of rules and regulations, if you like, for your behaviours in there, that effectively, use the trite term, that switch the caps lock key off to engage citizens. That's never going to be Facebook, it's never going to be Twitter and what have you. But it is going to be platforms like, out of the EDOS Institute up in Queensland, MindHive. People may have come along that, which is about engaging experts in a platform to co-construct solutions to wicked problems. It is in platforms like PlaySpeak, which while you can remain anonymous on it, you are geolocated, which tends to switch off the caps lock key. And the geolocation, of course, gives the data real relevance to those proponents wanting to run a consultation. If we think about it, my brother, he thought I was a nerd, he's a serious nerd. He spends a lot of his time writing Wikipedia articles, in his sort of semi-retirement. And I'm amazed by the Wikipedia phenomenon. It is actually the crowd itself, unregulated, enforcing the rules around how content is created and shared and distributed and so on. If you look at Bitcoin, and that's a whole other conversation, I think virtual currencies and platform currencies are going to have a massive impact over the next decade across the planet as well. That the rules are actually co-constructed. Trust, eBay trained us with this very early. When you, in the early days of eBay, trusted seller 93% and you knew that your package might arrive. Airbnb and Uber and all of those trust built in to the platform now is becoming really important. Now, I don't know, and I'll hand over to Tanya to answer this, what the platform in sort of Finnish lawmaking does. But in Wikipedia, for example, when you're co-constructing stuff, you get awards and you get rated and the marketplace itself is in fact regulating the behaviours of the participants in the marketplace.
Yeah, I don't really know if there's anything that we should be afraid of when we use crowdsourcing or civic engagement methods in general. Like, what is the worst case scenario we can see with crowdsourcing? For me, that would be like nobody would participate, or there's just 5 people and we have spent months designing and setting up these tools. And that has never happened. There has been always more participation than we expect. And also the quality of the submissions has been always really good. For instance, in these Finnish cases, only a handful of comments and ideas we needed to remove because of their inappropriate tone. We had 6,000 comments altogether, we removed 20. So that's like nothing. So there's something about, I think a lot of the fears are based on assumptions, and those assumptions actually disappear when we start these processes and see what's happening. And even if there were trolls that try to come and take over these processes, we can use then pre or post moderation. We can, for instance, what we do in the Palo Alto case, because of the freedom of speech laws in the United States, we can't really, it's not a good idea maybe to remove any comments, but we rate them off topic. So you can still see them and nobody gets annoyed and nobody feels like they are censored, but it's not in the main view for others. But others can still see these off-topic ideas if they want to. So I would say if there are fears like that, well, we don't know what the crowd will do. That's always the thought we have, because we don't know how many people will show up, what type of ideas they will propose, how others will react to that. But that's also the beauty of these methods, the surprise factor that we have.
I would add to that as a motivator for doing this, the negative is that the crowd is already more powerful than government, than business, than what have you. And therefore, if we aren't providing the platforms on which they can express and can engage, then they're going to find other digital channels to do it, and in a way that's not constructive and useful and so on.
Right, and the crowd just then, or the citizens, we should say perhaps, that they just alienate themselves more from government from civic activities, like because they feel like they are not heard, just like we heard yesterday in the presentations, that one form to then take action towards government is just not to vote, not to engage in anything, or then channel your activity to extreme forms of participation online or offline.
Let's just try taking 2 questions. So at the back, and then the guy down here with the scarf.
Hi, Dr. Sula Dreyfus from University of Melbourne. I've got 2 questions. The first is around structured versus unstructured data. So if you think of the open text box, tell us what you think, versus the structured survey, tick a box. Do you find, particularly Tanya, but perhaps both of you, that there are certain types of engagement projects that lend themselves more towards the structured data versus the unstructured data, particularly keeping in mind what you said, Tanya, about all the problems of synthesis that people have to go through in kind of going through the morass of the data? And the second question is, do you all have recommendations for best index sites or index pages for what you think are the best citizen technology government platform and interface projects that list them and showcase them?
Okay, and just a question here, thanks. Yep, if you could just now. Sorry? Well, that's fine. Give a comment. They can. I'm sure David
Paul
will
Henman
respond.
from the University of Queensland. I've been studying the use of digital technology in government policy making for over 20 years. And in that observation, I often find that people get captured by technologies and the new things that we can do. And I think what you've presented is really important, and we can see some significant innovations in what's occurring, particularly amongst the service delivery areas across the world. But we also have to stop and think about, often these are technical responses in policy making. They're actually not about the questions of politics. And when we see the questions of politics coming in, we actually see these type of innovations stop, as Tanya's example illustrated.
Yep.
Now, I want to suggest the reasons why these stop is because of the fundamental issues of policy, of politics. And David just said that the crowd is more powerful than the government. Well, we'd have to say, well, where is climate change? Changes in policy, what happened to the mineral resources tax in Australia. These are examples potentially where the crowd isn't more powerful. But that aside, we can also see crowdsourcing situations that have occurred where the politics gets in the road. In the UK, the Conservative government came in 5 years ago and initiated about 3 crowdsourcing processes. One about reducing red tape, one around ideas about improvements in efficiency, and I can't remember the third one. But as a result, one of the top areas that people want to change was decriminalisation of marijuana. No, the government wasn't going to touch that. There are a range of suggestions to improve the public services, and one by one, each of the government departments said, no, we're quite happy with the way things are, thank you very much. So this is an example where people are trying to contribute and they're not getting any outcome. So that actually then undermines people's trust in the sense of, well, why bother contributing? Which is the old problem of consultation all along. So in a sense, crowdsourcing is like consultation, but in a different way in some respects, if we think about it in terms of policy. Another example from Queensland is when the former Premier Campbell Newman created engagement with the questions about budget priorities in Queensland. Crowdsourced that and got a very clear message that privatisation wasn't acceptable. So what they then tried to do was say, we will have long-term leases. They didn't get the message from public, and they focused on only one thing about privatisation and not, and all of the other feedback around public policy and services was ignored. So the question, I guess, is, apart from where we see these developments in crowdsourcing, and there are great work in a lot of local governments around the world, I fundamentally see, where do we see these things disrupting policy that might challenge government?
Thank you.
So I might just have a quick crack at that and then perhaps hand to Tanya to go to the
First
previous
one.
question. And my quick response to that, because I could give you a whole 2-hour lecture on the state of Australian politics in my view, which I won't, is that just as culture in an organisation and around a board table constrains strategy and strategic options, so too, particularly in Australia, and I suspect in other Western democracies, politics constrains public policy options. Politics is increasingly getting narrower and narrower in Australia, which means our public policy options are getting narrower and narrower. That's my assessment of what's going on in Australia. It's part of the reason I wander around the country raving on like this, because it needs to change massively. I think Australia is, and if you look at the latest OECD digital economy report, came out a few weeks ago, you know, there's those bar graphs of the top 20 countries in just about every measure you can think of. Most of them, Australia's not even on the list, and if we are, it's always at 19 or 21 or what have you. Australia is, we've just had a 6-year debate about the poles and wires, if you like, if you take the NBN as the utility to get this stuff done, maybe you don't, and you watch the politicians all running away about any conversation about digital disruption and digital economy and so on, because they might think, the great unwashed might think it's about the NBN, and I don't want to be associated with that sort of stuff. We are behind the game. We are not catching up at any rate of knots. We're increasing the distance between us and the front runners, frankly, is getting larger and larger.
So one comment on that, and that's linked to the earlier question about the fears. So even though we use these civic engagement methods like crowdsourcing, it doesn't mean that we have to, say we have 500 ideas how the law should be reformed. It's of course impossible to implement all these ideas in the law, and nobody expects that, like my data shows. But then what we require, what we need is more accountability from the power holders, from the authorities, which means that we have to have an accountability loop to the participants explaining why, for instance, there's a group of people saying that a certain idea pops up a lot, like we should have more restrictions, like we should have higher age limit for off-road traffic, for instance. So, and then it's not possible for whatever reason, or it would be totally unfeasible to implement that in the law. It may be too expensive or whatever, it should change the traffic license system in the whole country. So what the authorities, what the politicians, policymakers should do is to explain that to the participants. So, and that adds to the accountability part and justification part in crowdsourced policymaking, and that's valuable in itself. And it does require more work from policymakers, that's for sure. Then the other question, the first question was about unstructured versus structured data. So what what we typically call unstructured data is anything that's in text format that doesn't come in quantitative format, which means numbers. So all the cases that we have studied here, the data are unstructured. So the structured data would mean that we would have options like 1, 2, 3, choose which one do you like the best, or 3 ideas how to improve safety in off-road traffic. Do you like 1, 2, or 3 the best? So then that's more of like opinion poll, and that then would require other types of methods. I wouldn't rely perhaps on self-selection. I would go for random sample to ensure the statistical representativeness. But there was another part of this question about index pages. What was that again, like case studies or technologies? Could you clarify? What was the question?
It was around whether you recommend any index sites that list or showcase the best examples of what you all have been presenting this morning.
Sure. So there are a couple of websites. For instance, Participedia, which is run by Ash Center at Harvard. So they showcase a lot of case studies from all over the world. You can search by keywords, and also people, if participants, if you have case studies that you want to submit to Participedia, just email them and they will actually cover your case, and then it will be searchable and findable for other people in the world. Participedia is one. Sunlight Foundation has a collection of case studies about transparency on their website. And also there are a bunch of other links, so if you come to me after this session, I'm happy to point you further.
Okay, I have 2 questions, if that's it. There's one at the back and one at the front. Is that it for everyone? Okay, let's go. The back, please. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Noah Taylor from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning. Question for both of the presenters. I work in fire and emergency management and particularly interested in online engagement, but there's a tendency with online engagement tools, particularly the platforms that you're talking about, to get very caught up in the new app, the new buzz, the new website. And I wonder what both of the presenters can think about ways that we in government can identify accessing existing networks and existing platforms that might already be in the public domain that we're unaware of, and how government can best utilise entrance and engagement methods into those existing networks that might have the tools and the resources and the expertise that we're already thinking about and already needing to require, without needing to develop an entirely new platform or roll out a new app or a new tool.
That's a great question, and I'm not advocating for any new softwares or tools, even though I work at engineering school, but I advocate for using tools that people know already, and as you say, tools and platforms where people are already, like for instance Facebook, Twitter. However, but then there are issues with that, because not everybody, if we just had, for instance, these crowdsourced law reform processes, if we had run those on Facebook, not everybody is on Facebook. So that creates a huge issue for the government, because the basic principle is that all these platforms should be accessible for anybody. So if you have a principle that you don't want to sign up on Facebook, and also there's another issue that comes with Facebook, for instance, is that then people couldn't participate in an anonymous way, and that's a condition for some people to actually participate, and we should allow that. I think so. There are a lot of really inexpensive technologies, for instance, that we have experimented with in these Finnish cases. We licensed software from an American company for $2,000 per year. The same software has been used by President Obama in his crowdsourcing efforts, so we knew that it's pretty robust because it can handle, millions of people basically. And instead of the Finnish government building their own software, we were able to learn about different features, and then those learnings were channeled to the Finnish government has this huge project about online engagement, and they're actually building new platforms. And then we use these case studies as pilot studies, so that then all the findings could be then utilized in this process. However, what is interesting is perhaps a little bit off the record, but what we found out then as a result that this massive, I think, 2 or 5 million euro project, where the plan was to build these crowdsourcing tools, open data tools, whatnot. But none of that was actually completed the way that it was planned, but there was just more and more taxpayers' euros channeled to these projects. And with then compared 2 million euros to $2,000 a year, the government now has changed their plan, and they're planning to outsource more of these software tools, because they see that, we can actually get more, better user interfaces and better products when we use the products that have been used in other contexts previously, for instance, for companies' purposes, not only in public sector. So that's an interesting outcome in itself, and it wasn't the plan or the goal, but it just happened.
I'll very briefly, I agree with everything Tanya said, and I guess my overarching, assertion is we've got to move to more a utility style, that is a ubiquitous utility of engagement. Now, interestingly, in your department, DWELP, or I'm told the W is silent or something these days, Adam Fennessy is, I think, really leading the charge on a lot of this stuff and doing an extraordinarily great job. Bruce Thompson in your department, I think, is probably, out of what I've seen in Australia, probably building one of the most robust geospatial, utilities around data sets, and that new data sets can be added to that via different channels. So when I think about utility, think about the phone network. I might have an Apple iPhone and you might have a, whatever, but we're able to use the same network to communicate, I guess. Maybe this isn't a very good analogy, I'm not sure, metaphor. What DWELP seems to be building to me is a utility so that other agencies, other land-based, land use, geospatially aware policy issues can layer data sets over many data sets, and that's where the answers in future public policy questions will come from. Including that, I think Gillian Sparks, your Commissioner for Environment here, is doing some great thinking about by legislation, produces a report that's 600 pages every 10 years that nobody reads. And what she's thinking about is stop behaving like Lonely Planet, create a more TripAdvisor platform on which the state of the environment, which is her legislative regulatory requirement, can be actively, passively access large amounts of data sets and create online, real-time, the state of the environment report as she goes.
Just the last short question, please.
Hi, David Ainscoe from the Department of Transport and Main Roads in Queensland. I'll keep it brief. Thank you for presentations this morning. I just had a question about your thoughts on the impacts of those in our societies or our publics that maybe don't have the digital literacy skills to tap into some of these things.
So the question is about digital divide, basically. So that's a crucial question. Realistically, we will never achieve like 100% participation in any of these online processes in the next 10 years or so. And of course, we should always try to do that, try to reach that goal. But interestingly, the digital divide in the context of the United States, in the cities where I worked, Chicago, Vallejo, now Palo Alto, and then in Finland, the digital divide is actually less crucial problem than we thought, because people can access online in public libraries if they want to. And one interesting finding from the housing company law case in Finland was that we had a really big proportion of senior people participate, like people who were over 65 years old. And typically we have thought that the more senior you are in age, the less likely you are spend time online. But that was totally the opposite based on our data.
In Australia, well, first in a US context, a friend of mine, Larry Irving, who worked for Clinton Gore and pretty much coined the term digital divide, is going to be in Australia during August doing a series of talks. And if you want to understand digital divide issues, he's really worth going to see. I'll plug the little plug. But secondly, I've been involved in a project with the Social Action Research Centre out of Anglicare in Tasmania. And while it's only Tasmanian data, I think we can extrapolate out from that quite significantly, where we looked at a group of different groupings of disadvantage, if you like, and we interviewed 1,200 people, and it was a very quite deep dive into digital divide issues. And what we found was that in almost all groupings of disadvantage, the mobile phone has become the tool for so they might have bypassed the fixed wall internet, at home, but the mobile phone has become the tool in which they are communicating with the world. And interestingly, Facebook is the email, the utility, the what have you. And it's very clear that if you look at the hierarchy from this data, and it's available online, this report, it's very useful, instructive, it shows that most of these families living in poverty, for example, are actually placing the pay-as-you-go mobile phone bill above food on the table, above electricity, above school books, above what have you. So it's become the key. And I'll end on this note, John, I promise. Never give an ex-politician a stage. That I've been pitching this project around Australia. I'm waiting for someone to take it up, like a Telstra or a government or someone. We're very good at putting free Wi-Fi down the main drag of the retail centre and saying it's free Wi-Fi, come to our shopping centre. You know what we should be doing in Australia? We should be providing free Wi-Fi across pockets of disadvantaged geographic suburbs, and then getting together the government services, whether it's education and health, with an NGO services, and using that channel to provide services and connectivity to people living in disadvantage, so that when the mobile phone, the pay-as-you-go mobile phone SIM runs out, they're not disconnected, because that's the major finding out of this survey.